Welcome to the web browser embedded soft phone talk, and welcome to Astracon. We've been using browser embedded soft phones off and on, testing them mostly for the last several years, and about a year ago we really found a lot more demand from our client base in the call center industries. So we partnered with or became a reseller of Zoiper because we found it to be one of the most stable web phone platforms that we've been able to use and test, as well as its flexibility. So that kind of became our preferred web phone of choice. And along the way, we tested a lot of different web phones, threw a lot of them out, had a lot of inconsistencies, mostly with the end user. At-home phone users, agents that needed to stay on this phone for 8 to 12 hours, ran into lots of issues along the way. So that's where the most of the content from this presentation came from, years of frustration. What is a browser embedded phone? It runs inside the web browser, not as a separate application. Meaning you usually can't kill it in the taskbar if you want. It's a part of the browser. It loads with a web page. Usually requires no configuration from the end user. That's one of the key benefits of it, since configuration can be set by a dynamic web page that the phone's included on. The four application frameworks that web phones have been written for are Java, ActiveX, Flash, and XPI browser plugin. This is an example, and if we get done soon enough, I'll actually show you a live example because we got the Wi-Fi to work in here, hooray. And I was actually able to make a call through a web phone embedded inside of our agent application. But this is just an example. The web phone's actually loaded inside of an iframe on our agent screen. It's optional. You could actually plug any web phone in here. It just takes a little programming with PHP or ASP or whatever your dynamic language of choice is. Why use a browser embedded phone? For at-home users, much less tech support required because no need for configuration. The perfect example of this, one of our clients based in California does customer service support for inbound infomercial products, upside down tomato plant holder, stuff like that, Body by Jake. They take calls for 70 different products. They've got 200 and some queues coming in. And most of their agents are at home, not part of the corporate call center that they have at their location in California. So, of course, as you can imagine, their help desk was busy a lot with people trying to figure out, what was wrong with iBeam. iBeam is what they'd been using for quite a while. And because we had set up multi-phone phone login load balancing with our Vicidial system, they had to configure multiple SIP accounts so that they could balance across servers and have failover. When we switched them over to using Zoiper Web, after the initial, I don't want to say shock, but the initial troubles with getting the plugin to load on some of their computers, we went back and forth with Zoiper a few times, different versions, had different bugs. But in the end, they ended up using less than half the help desk support time that they had been using concurrently or on a regular ongoing basis. Basically, their monthly help desk hours were cut in half by using the web phone. No more configuration, no more questions like, what's a proxy? And codecs? What does that mean? Well, I selected G729 and I didn't have G711 select. What's that mean? All of that completely went away. Everything was configurable through the web interface on the admin side. And even the phone login load balancing is handled automatically. So when the phone comes up, it comes up on the server that the agent is supposed to be on. Software versions can be updated on the server instantly, no user action needed. That's another big one. I already mentioned the allowable codecs, phone accounts. All of that can be centrally configured. Load balance logins that we have in Vicidial is all automatic. On to the runtime environments used. Java, of course, from Sun, now Oracle, with its various versions and flavors across the different user interfaces. Flash from Adobe, ActiveX from Microsoft, and then the Open Framework, or XPI framework. First, we're going to go over Java. Of course, it's owned by Oracle. It is open source, but as we've seen, they will not hesitate to sue you for whatever reason they deem necessary if they don't like you. Runtime engines are available for every major operating system. There are issues we've found with some Java-based web phones and some operating systems or some runtimes. That's the number one issue, the runtime consistency. There have been some documented security issues with Java. That's not really that much of a concern anymore. And we've had issues with long-running phone calls like an agent would have, being on the same agent-connected session for 8 hours. We've had issues with audio quality degradation and locking up. Also, some audio quality and connection issues with the OS. That's one of the problems we had in our initial testing of a couple of different Java phones. Flash, of course, is owned by Adobe. Runtime engines are fairly consistent and available for just about every major operating system. There are, of course, security issues with Flash. If you notice, just about every time you reboot your computer, there's a new Flash update out there because some other exploits come along. Again, we had issues with long-running phone calls, audio quality and connection issues with the OS as well. It is more resource intensive, and it does require a proxy server. We're going to go over that in a little more detail when we get to the Red5 example. ActiveX, of course, owned by Microsoft, runs only on Microsoft operating systems, doesn't support Linux or Mac. Components often require installation, even though it's fairly easy. If you have clients running on Vista, though, sometimes there can be issues with Vista thinking, well, just about everything is a security threat. So while the installation process of the plugin's running, Vista might throw up several roadblocks in your face. Hasn't been a problem on Windows 7, and with the more recent versions of Zoiper Web, for example, we've been using, we haven't had issues with that as well on Vista. But, and of course, just like most other things, security issues with ActiveX, not as frequent that we've noticed, but there are still some there, and we felt the need to mention that. The Open XPI browser plugin framework. It's available for every major operating system. There are some issues with cross-browser support. Won't necessarily work on Opera, for example, if it works on Firefox or Chrome. It is a less flexible architecture, and of course, like everything else, there are security issues because it involves the browser. Application installation for most of these is usually fairly simple. You put the components on a web server, you embed the object in HTML. Flash does require a media server because it's basically just doing audio transport between the proxy and the end user. And that proxy has to then convert the audio into whatever codec you want to use, as well as handle all the SIP messaging. And of course, you have to have some of these, we've had issues where locked down workstations have problems with permissions and getting some of the components installed because they aren't allowed to install things. This is the first example. There are actually quite a few people using, companies using Vicidial that use Doddlephone. It is a Java applet. It does allow user configuration, which can be an issue, meaning when this loads, the user can click on the little cog there and go in and monkey with stuff. It does have a wide range of codecs available for it, and it is SIP protocol only. Like just about everything Java, it's multiple web support, and Windows, Linux, and Mac. No. Most of these aren't. We'll go over the ones that are. This is another one, IAX Telephone 2. Really the only difference between this and the last one is this is an IAX protocol phone. Most of these do have APIs. This one, of course, allows user configuration right there above the number pad. You don't even have to click anywhere to get to it. Again, we do have, there's some Vicidial users out there that are using this one as well. Mexaur, this is a company that actually will customize. They have quite a few different skins that they've created for their Java-based web phone. Last time I contacted them, they were only supporting G711. But again, we have a few, we were referred to this by a few users in our community. This one, the Mizutech, SIP only. There really isn't too much difference in the actual functionality of most of these. This one obviously is a little prettier, but again, it's another Java applet web phone. The late Moziax Webphone. I say late because it hasn't been under active development for some time. It was a really neat idea. I actually got it to work once, I think back in 2009. Haven't been able to use it with a recent version, but it was a really nice concept that basically you have a pure Firefox plugin for a web phone that doesn't require anything else. The people who made this went on to make some other proprietary web phones, but I believe the source code is still available on MozDev if you wanted to go tinker with it. Sippy, this is a company that makes SIP gateways. They came out with their own Java applet web phone. It's licensed per domain name. It offers G711 and GSM. Now here's one of the flash-based ones. I'm not going to mention, there are a ton of them out there. There are over a dozen different flash-based phones that are basically operate through a controlled proxy, meaning you don't control the proxy, somebody else does. So even though you can specify, these are the codecs, this is the proxy, this is who I want to connect to, the audio is still going through somebody else's service. It's a lot like how, at least in my experience with Phono, how that works. The audio is going through somebody else's services before it gets to your equipment. Ozeki. This one's a bit unique in that it requires, you can actually buy per channel licenses for this. It is flash-based. It requires installation of the proxy server on a Windows server with a real-world IP address. That's kind of the big downside on my interpretation of it, but it does work. It is fairly scalable, and they even have demos on their website that you can use. And this leads me to Red5, open source. Yes, it is open source, and you'll know it by how difficult it is to install and configure. There are a lot of pieces to it. It does work. It works across multiple platforms. Of course, it is flash-based, so you are only transporting audio back to your proxy server, whatever that is. It's new. It's relatively new. A lot of the documentation on it is from earlier versions. They are working on, I know, G729 support, GSM support. Some of the core modules behind Red5 actually have that support now. The Red5 Webphone in its current incarnation does not. The Webphone is basically an add-on to the Web5 suite of utilities, which includes a lot more than just audio transport. There's chat, and there are other things that it does, instant messaging. And it's a fairly complex application suite, and just getting it installed and getting the Red5 Webphone installed and getting everything configured actually can take quite a lot of effort. But no licensing restrictions. It's free. And if you want total control, this is pretty much your only option. This is the example of, from the Red5 Webphone site, of how the actual transport of audio as well as SIP messaging occurs. It's not real simple. Basically, you've got the Red5 server, the Red5 application, you've got the RTMP user class and the SIP user class, and all of that exists on your proxy. Everything basically connects from your web browser to the proxy. The proxy figures out the different applications inside of the proxy, figures out what to do with each different piece, and then it consolidates those in the SIP user class and sends that on to, in your case, maybe an Astra server. So there's a lot going on, and with all of the non-flash-based web phones, the proxy doesn't even exist. So this is basically adding another transport path piece into your audio and messaging puzzle, something that has limitations in capacity and another link in the chain that can go bad. XeniaLab Webphone. This is actually a browser-based plugin. It's designed for SIP only. Not too much information on this, and they actually wouldn't respond to me, but because it was browser-based plugin and I didn't have too many examples, I thought I'd throw it in there. Of course, the Zoiper Webphone. This one is not only ActiveX, but also NP API, so it will work on Internet Explorer, it'll work on Chrome, it'll work in Firefox. It's supposed to work in Opera. I haven't tried it myself, as well as Safari. The key with this one that really differentiates it, it's SIP and IAX. So if you're like a lot of our clients and you have some people that are operating on Comcast and SIP is deprioritized or blocked outright, you can switch to ActiveX, and it's magic. It works. And there are a lot of other carriers we've had those kind of issues with as well, going through SIP. There's several codec options. G729 for the licensing issues is not an option because they don't license this per port. It's licensed per domain. So there's no really way of accounting for how many licenses would be in use. The big downside of the Zoiper Webphone, it is Windows only. I have heard before from somebody that they are working on other versions, but haven't heard anything recently about that. It is, in our experience and our clients that have tested it experience, the most reliable one we've used in a call center at-home agent type of scenario. And it's the one that we generally recommend installing. The license cost, I believe, is it's around $1,000 per fully qualified domain name. But you can serve as many web client sessions off that as you want. 1,000, 10,000, it doesn't matter. There are also several different versions of the actual application. You see the one along the bottom here. That is actually a fully functional Zoiper Webphone. That was made custom for one of our clients to fit in the bar right below the top navigation of a monitoring page, which we'll actually see in maybe the next slide after this one. Obviously, I'm a bit slanted towards the call center application side of things, but in terms of streamlining of operations, ease of use, it's really helped a lot of our clients with agent interface interaction. Live blind monitoring is a big one, not having to use a phone, not having to use anything but your web browser if you're blind monitoring. Listening to recordings, conferencing, coaching agents, quality control, and agent training. Since there's no configuration, there's really no limit to the number of licenses you can have or users or anything like that. It's been a much more flexible way of dealing with phones. This is the monitor page, Vicidial monitor page, where you can basically just click on one of the listen links and it brings up one of the phone call, the agent that you want to listen to, right inside of the web browser, right along the top. Some other commercial website applications, you've already seen a lot of these. click to call from a commercial website, a customer service website. No phone number needed, no telco costs. This is where the flash versions really shine. That's what they're good at. So many people, I think 85, 90% of people, at-home users have Flash, one version or another, installed on their system. So they're able to use at least a basic web phone to just click and connect, provided they have a microphone, which is a whole different set of statistics, but much lower, in fact. But it is an option, and it's growing, and you see it on more and more websites. There are a lot of applications like Phono and Tring and a dozen others that I could name that offer basic Flash-based phone connection, as well as Red5, of course. The most recent version of Red5 does require almost the most recent version of Flash, however. And what you see in the statistics of Flash installs is that there are actually a lot of people running 5-year-old Flash that doesn't work with most of the web phones out there that are Flash-based. So that's another thing to consider.
Also, every time you go to the user goes to the website, they need to install a plugin, right?
If it's Flash-based, not necessarily. It depends upon which one you're using, but the general Flash-based ones actually don't require an additional plugin. Some of them do. And it depends on which version, which operating system you're on sometimes as to whether you need an additional Flash plugin or not. It can get confusing, but that's something, if you're planning on doing, I would recommend either getting a different set of user agents, like one on Windows XP, one on Vista, one on Mac, and actually trying them with different browsers, trying them with different Flash versions. There are even Q&A companies that do this as their business. They have 100 different workstations that they will literally test different applications on different versions. And that's something that one of our larger clients has actually hired a company like that and exposed several compatibility issues. So we were able to put together this excruciatingly detailed page of what will work and what will not work on their help desk application. So. And I think that's it. And before we go into any questions, just wanted to show this is actually a live application of our agent interface that's running right now. I'm just going to dial an internal test number. Maybe you'll be able to hear it after it picks up. 6 seconds. And that's the Wi-Fi. And you can actually see, in this case, I'm using a GSM codec. It gives you the duration, has the dial pad. This is actually configurable. You can turn the dial pad on or off. And there are versions of the Zoiper Webphone that have actually most of the buttons removed. Well, not bad for a saturated network. So that's how it works in the real world for agents that are using it. Yeah, questions? Yeah.